Watchers call. Whispers from the eternal void.
The astropathic choir reported receiving transmissions from Librarium Sanctus on Valdris Tertius, 3 standard years after we watched the planet burn. I am Interrogator Adept Cassius Thorn, Ordo Xenos, and that impossible fact has dragged me from the comfort of routine heretic, hunting into something that defies every law of Imperial doctrine. The transmission logs are precise, authenticated, and utterly heretical in their implications. Valdris Tertius was designated for exterminatus 37 months ago during Hive Fleet Cronus' advance through the Pacificus Fringe. I witnessed the cyclonic torpedoes fall. I logged the plasma bombardment. I filed the completion reports myself, yet astropath transcendent Voss trembles before me now, silver tears streaming from her augmetic eyes as she maintains psychic contact with structured thought patterns broadcasting across 3 subsectors. The transmissions follow standard Librarium protocols, my lord, she whispers, her voice carrying harmonics that make my teeth ache. Catalog updates, acquisition requests, reading schedules. But the books they reference don't exist, and every transmission ends with the same phrase: knowledge endures. Containment priority. Memetic. Mission parameters: investigate, assess, extract, or eliminate. Time constraint: warp storm Thanatos approaches. Extraction window: 13 hours maximum. The strike cruiser: immutable truth translates from the warp into a system that should be dead. Instead, Valdris Tertius hangs before us like an accusation. Verdant forests where atomic glass should stretch. Pristine oceans reflecting twin suns that our bombardment should have extinguished. Orbital auger arrays detect no radiation signatures, no atmospheric toxins, no trace of the exterminatus I personally authorized. My kill team assembles in the forward deployment bay with ritualistic precision. Tech Dominus Zerath 9 hunches like a mechanical predator, 13 mechadendrites clicking against his cranial cowl, each appendage inscribed with different litanies of the Omnisire. His Vox grill crackles. Surface scans detect massive electromagnetic anomalies centered on Librarium coordinates. Machine spirits broadcast in pre-STC patterns. Probability of data heresy, significant. Sister Dialogues Miriam approaches with measured steps, her power armor's ceramite plates inscribed with protective war texts in 17 dead languages. The sacred inscriptions seem to writhe when observed peripherally, though they remain perfectly still under direct scrutiny. Vox transmissions carry undertones that resonate with forbidden frequencies, she reports, her melodious voice tight with controlled concern. My linguistic cogitators identify pre-Age of Strife dialectical elements that should not exist in Imperial archives. The tempestuous scions of the 47th Valdorian stand at attention. Hotshot lasguns charged, rebreather masks concealing their faces. Sergeant Corvin's scarred features remain, impassive as he accepts mission parameters, though his grip tightens when I mention the facility's impossible survival. We descend through atmosphere that tastes of old parchment and ink. The Thunderhawk's Auspex arrays register atmospheric readings that spell out numbers when graphed over time. 131313, repeating like a mantra written in the very air we breathe. The landing zone materializes through morning mist, where our orbital bombardment should have created a crater spanning kilometers. We find gentle hills covered in grass growing in perfect spirals around carved monuments. Each stone bears identical high Gothic inscriptions. Knowledge endures. The subsonic hum begins as we approach the facility perimeter. My Auspex registers it as structured silence, a contradiction that should be impossible. Yet readings remain consistent. The sound exists in spaces between sounds, suggesting vast machinery operating just beyond perception's threshold. Pressure, 913 millibars. Humidity, 13%. Temperature, 13 degrees Celsius. Resonance spike at 13 Hz. Coincidence probability, negligible. Librarium Sanctus rises before us like a cathedral of learning, spires reaching skyward in architectural impossibility. The building shows no bombardment damage, its walls pristine white marble veined with gold that pulses like living tissue. Stained glass windows depict eternal scholars, their faces turned toward books containing more pages than physical dimensions should allow. Atmospheric readings show elevated, processed cellulose particles. Zerath 9 reports mechadendrites sampling air with delicate precision. Paper dust, ink vapors, organic compounds consistent with extensive manuscript production. Facility appears operational at full capacity. Sister Miriam raises her hand for silence, head tilted as if hearing distant music. Whispers in dead tongues, she says, voice tight with controlled fear. Prayers to the Omnissiah, spoken in languages predating the cult Mechanicus by 10 millennia. We approach the main entrance, massive adamantine doors that should be melted slag. The portal stands ajar, revealing darkness that absorbs our lumen beams rather than reflecting them. Ancient servo skulls drift through the gap, eye lenses glowing amber as they perform eternal patrol routes. I check my chronometer as we prepare to breach. 12 hours, 43 minutes until warp storm arrival. Standard reconnaissance parameters, assuming standard rules apply. They do not. The moment we cross the threshold, my chronometer begins counting backward. 12 hours, 42 minutes. 41. Time flows in reverse, as if the building exists in temporal opposition to the universe beyond its walls. Sister Miriam gasps, gauntleted hands clutching purity seals adorning her armor. The sacred parchments writhe like living things. High Gothic inscriptions, dissolving and reforming in scripts that hurt to perceive directly. Languages predating humanity's emergence from Terra rewrite themselves across her sanctified wards, transforming protective prayers into something older and infinitely more dangerous. The subsonic hum intensifies, and I realize with growing dread it is not machinery we hear, but breathing. The facility draws breath like a living thing, inhaling knowledge and exhaling ancient hunger. Knowledge endures, whispers a voice from everywhere and nowhere, spoken in perfect high Gothic by vocal cords that have been dust for millennia. Our chronometers count backward in obedient, terrified unison. The purity seals continue rewriting themselves in languages that predate civilization itself. We step forward into the throat of something vast and patient and eternally, impossibly hungry for the written word. The corridors of Librarium Sanctus pulse with organic rhythm beneath our boots. Sanctified adamantine and blessed ceramite expanding and contracting like the chest cavity of some vast, slumbering beast. I signal tactical formation, wedge deployment, scions forward and aft, Miriam and Zerath 9 within my protective arc. Our footfalls should echo with metallic percussion against blessed flooring, yet each step reverberates as the whisper of turning pages, thousands of manuscripts opening simultaneously in chambers we cannot see. Structural integrity, compromised but stable. Defensive positions, none viable due to architectural flux. Egress routes, uncertain. The lumen strips overhead flicker in deliberate patterns,
that blessed machine spirits corrupted into spelling words in dead languages. Sister Miriam's melodious voice tightens with controlled fear as she identifies the sequences. Pre-imperial scripts. Proto-Lex dialects that predate the Lectitio Divinitatus. Their spelling invitations. Air recyclers wheeze like labored breathing. Blessed filters processing atmosphere thick with aged parchment and oxidizing ink. Each mechanical breath draws sterile ship air and exhales something heavier, weighted with accumulated knowledge. The recycling unit's machine spirits chant incorrupted binary
Nicodeck one in the zero Monday that Frank is 0.0 points of quantity one is 0.1 to the whole little when the Berlin so is actually one to lap when the zero from the work and the show pagadi point when they put in the job Saturday when in the show one can they want it zero when they were in zero and they were in the zero one of the one at the zero bunny they want the zero actually the part and show but in this one blue but one when they grow what do with the zero to put that over the zero evident but the show was and the funny in the zero if it's in it what in the zero of the bar take one case out to be in a quantity to require the port that should swallow the post in the zero to pan the tape in the cherry point take away one zero point that one in the zero back one of the point and the zero one at the one as zero but then could bend zero would the phone and let's go one other one against zero come to the point in the zero what create one and the zero and the day one can zero for the or is zero point is one and zero may wipe the point and the zero to Sunday the pot says to quantity quantity zero be and the could in the zero got the paper zero one will the zero body body in the job planet the one to one and the poly in zero pan in quality to be one point one day one with zero point poly in zero pop the point and drop kindly put zero one need work zero funny one and zero fun but the person is study body that person zero one that put in the zero pan and the cool zero pan in a pan in the zero you and one and zero murder you put in the zero water and the person zero equally they got zero of one of the point show from the flying up row one and they want the zero when you get a body show one of the woods you could put in the goal like so funny live in the zero see the part that's about one sleep once in the zero opposite once zero and the type bunny in the zero one to pick up in the zero the one to take on the best go for the left back as a people to the one to try the point and put it zero quite a grip on the zero so they put you zero the bank but the zero open the one in the zero point once the zero one and the quality zero go to this one they zero upon the two but the natural you wouldn't get the wash this away but it went through and the quarter with shotgun that if open the zero big city wagon as if market they point the zero and the tip on the correction that the point the week one the fun as we quality one in the zero pan in the was zero beginning of what you grow up in the one get the quality that one in the jury sudden that quality zero people was in the zero one and white minutes or when you the watch is like thank you but the zero company but the zero pack continental you put it a party in the zero one say pump get really pump break one the zero different is the part in the zero well in the was in the zero one then the one in the one and the water in the zero one with that one bit level and get a point necessarily one that you went in the zero hey can one event zero bomb they can then zero one at one the shop one in the one that's really one the person in zero way anybody going in the zero one get very in the jolly candidate what is in the zero get on and they believe that is a boom massively one the zero speak one in the zero bugging the one when the zero we put say once in the zero one in the one and the zero go money and one again zero one in the what phase zero tablet one the zero to winner they one in the zero t one nick they one in the zero the zero would you the zero 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 because the zero get always one in the zero one the zero one for so but one anyone can upon the zero one the one the zero one the zero grow for the will open the point and the zero one but the zero but the zero one as a poly one the zero to quarter for a point with the form the zero ping and one the one.
Knowledge injury is translated into the Zekrid language of machines. Sergeant Corvin maintains perimeter security while his scions advance with disciplined precision. Thermals ambiguous, he reports through Vox static. Movement reads like convection, not bodies. Humidity steady at 13%. The walls themselves pulse with information, flow. Blessed adamantine conducting data through crystalline matrices that should be impossible. Text appears directly on surfaces without inscription, flowing like liquid script. The interrogator, adept, advances through corridors that breathe, with accumulated knowledge, his kill team maintaining formation despite architectural impossibilities. Cellulose particulate, increasing. Resonance, stable at 13 Hertz. Organic, compounds consistent with extensive manuscript degradation. We reach the first junction, where consecrated brass frames an archway wreathed in sanctity seals. The parchments writhe under observation, their wax pliant despite apparent age. Knowledge endures appears in high Gothic, then rewrites itself in angular scripts that hurt to perceive directly. The number 13 surfaces in scrolling diagnostics. Lumen output cycling every 13 heartbeats, atmospheric pressure dropping 13 millibars per corridor section. The first bodies occupy a vast reading hall, rows of ornate data thrones stretching into distant gloom. Adeptus Mechanicus archivists remain seated in positions of eternal reverence, red robes draped over forms achieving terrible immortality. Their mechadendrites have fused directly into data ports, blessed metal flowing like resin into sanctified connection points. binary cant whispers from their vox grills in endless streams. Yet their eye lenses display scrolling text that updates continuously, despite obvious biological cessation. Machine spirits remain active despite corporeal termination. Tech Dominus Zerath 9 intones. 13 mechadendrites extending toward interface ports, pulsing with organic light. Attempting communion protocols. His primary interface mechadendrite connects with a wet, organic sound that violates every principle of blessed machine interface. Immediately, Zerath 9's optical sensors flare with overloaded illumination as feedback cascades through his systems. Abominable, he rasps, voice distorting into horrifyingly organic tones. Taste spectrum. Colors beyond visible range singing mathematical equations. Audio input. Geometry of uncreation. Tactile feedback. Unread words weighing 1.3 kilograms per conceptual unit. Sister Miriam performs the rite of technological benediction, her steady voice causing the corpse's eye lenses to flicker in acknowledgement. Blessed be the machine that serves the Emperor's will. Sanctified be the knowledge that illuminates his truth. Zerath 9 severs connection, mechadendrites retracting with sparks of blessed electricity. Not binary, not trinary, paragraphic consciousness. It thinks in narrative structures rather than algorithmic processes. Machine spirit corruption. Total. Processing methodology. Narrative rather than binary. Threat assessment. Extreme memetic hazard. Investigation reveals the fundamental violation. The facility's machine spirits have been replaced by entities that process information as complete stories, encompassing entire thought processes within single conceptual units. Where blessed cogitators should think in ones and zeros, these consciousnesses think in paragraphs, chapters, endless narratives that consume rather than compute. We advance deeper into breathing architecture, walls expanding to accommodate our passage, before contracting behind us with wet, sucking sounds. The blessed ceramite weeps condensation pooling in Gothic script. Knowledge endures repeated in moisture that evaporates before examination. The subsonic hum intensifies, structured silence organizing itself into recognizable patterns. My Auspex registers it as breathing, not machinery, but respiration of something vast and patient and eternally hungry for the written word. Then our Vox units activate without authorization. Static clears to reveal our own voices, reading from sources we have never encountered. Zerath 9's mechanical tones, broadcast. Chapter 7. The Tech Dominus discovers fusion protocols, integrating his consciousness with facility data streams. Corvin's disciplined voice follows. Chapter 13. Sister Miriam's faith wavers as she comprehends divine knowledge's true nature. My own voice emerges from speakers I did not activate. Chapter 15. Interrogator Adept. Thorn makes the choice that dooms his soul to eternal service. The readings continue, describing our deaths in clinical detail, each scheduled for different chapters in stories we have not yet lived. Our Vox units broadcast futures feeling as inevitable as the past, spoken in voices we recognize as our own with the certainty of events already concluded. Sister Miriam begins the litany of protection against false prophecy. Her rewritten purity seals flaring with desperate light. But even sacred words are absorbed by walls breathing with the rhythm of turning pages, exhaled as something older and infinitely more patient. The facility reads us as we read it, and it has already written our ending. The Vox units continue their heretical recitation, broadcasting our predetermined futures with bureaucratic precision. Each transmission describes deaths we have not yet died, choices we have not yet made, spoken in voices we recognize as our own, yet rendered alien by prophetic certainty. Sergeant Corvin strikes his communit with armored fist, but the voices persist, emanating from every surface as if the facility itself has become our confessor and executioner both. Memetic contamination confirmed. Entity demonstrates precognitive narrative control. Investigation priority. Comprehend informational consumption mechanism. Deeper penetration reveals the fundamental violation. The walls themselves confess their transformation through microscopic script swarming beneath sanctified surfaces. Letters flowing like living organisms, rewriting continuously to chronicle everything occurring within these boundaries. Through magnification protocols, I observe endless text documenting our footsteps, converting our breathing patterns into punctuation marks, transforming our thoughts into marginalia that expands infinitely to accommodate annotation. Tech Dominus Xerath, 9 extends sensor mechadendrites toward the living manuscript, optical arrays cycling through spectral analysis. Classification, Lexicon Mechanicus, he intones in measured binary cant mixed with clinical high Gothic. Facility has achieved metamorphosis from data repository to self-documenting entity. Surface composition, 73% blessed adamantine, 14% organic cellulose, 13% substance registering as conceptual matter. The bureaucratic implications stagger comprehension. Every Imperial facility maintains operational logs, personnel records, maintenance schedules according to Administratum Protocol Secundus. This entity has perverted those sacred functions, transforming documentation from record-keeping into active creation of events it describes. Gravitational flux variable by epistemic density. Atmospheric pressure inversely proportional to conceptual complexity. We advance through corridors that extend and contract based on narrative necessity rather than architectural logic. When our exploration follows dramatic progression, passages remain stable. When Sergeant Corvin attempts tactical maneuvers violating story conventions, walls reshape themselves, forcing us back into narratively appropriate formations. The first major archive demonstrates the entity's horrifying efficiency. Gravity increases to crushing intensity as we approach restricted Imperial documents, each classified file adding literal weight to our movements. My carapace armor strains under forces that should not exist, blessed ceramite groaning as knowledge itself gains mass. Sister Miriam performs emergency atmospheric blessing protocols, her melodious voice tight with controlled panic. The Emperor protects those who seek knowledge in his name. Conversely, a children's educational alcove creates dangerous atmospheric thinning. Simple primers about basic Imperial doctrine reduce air density until breathing becomes labored. The weight of ignorance proves lighter than air, threatening to lift us from blessed ground. Narrative density affects local gravitational constants. Restricted archives, 2.1 standard gravities. Children's primers, 0.3 standard gravities. We discover Magos Archivist Thalan integrated into a data throne of impossible construction. His organic components have been systematically replaced by parchment and ink, yet consciousness persists within the hybrid form. Blessed flesh merges seamlessly with written text, his skin bearing subcutaneous script that flows and rewrites continuously. Augmetic eye lenses display scrolling data streams, while organic eyes weep liquid ink that pools in Gothic characters. Knowledge endures. Greetings, Interrogator Adept Thorn. He speaks in measured clinical tones, retaining human inflection, despite obvious transformation. I am currently documenting the great cataloging, systematic conversion of all knowledge within facility boundaries into living narrative. Classification, ongoing. Priority, maximum. Estimated completion, eternal. Zerath 9 attempts interface protocols through standard Mechanicus communion rites. His primary mechadendrite extends toward Thalin's data ports, blessed metal connecting with wet, organic sounds. Immediately, feedback cascades through both consciousnesses. Omnisire preserve us. Zerath 9 rasps, voice distorting into harmonics, suggesting multiple speakers. Entity processes data through narrative synthesis rather than binary computation. It experiences knowledge as complete stories encompassing entire conceptual frameworks within single processing cycles. Sacred binary replaced with narrative processing. Threat classification. Extreme heretical deviation. Thalen nods with measured approval. Correct assessment. Tech dominus. Binary thinking fragments understanding into discrete units. Narrative consciousness comprehends knowledge holistically. Every fact exists within context of complete stories. Every datum contributes to overarching chronicles encompassing total understanding. The facility's layout continues reshaping around our exploration patterns. Architecture responds to dramatic necessity rather than tactical requirements, creating smooth passages toward narratively appropriate discoveries while contracting to prevent actions that violate story logic. Environmental hazards escalate with knowledge density. A restricted Inquisition archive creates gravitational fields approaching crushing intensity, forcing us to crawl through passages where classified documents add literal weight to reality. The entity demonstrates comprehensive documentation capabilities by displaying our complete mission parameters on wall surfaces we have not yet approached. Classified information displayed without authorization. Source, unknown. Containment, impossible. T-10, :28:00. Counting backward. The rotunda beyond contains carved panels listing catalog indices around its circumference. Among them, a blank rectangle awaits my approach, its surface smooth and expectant. As I draw near, letters erupt from blessed adamantine with dry, popping sounds, as if reality had been keeping them under pressure. The panel inscribes itself in precise Gothic script. My complete service record appearing with impossible detail. Every mission, every commendation, every classified operation unfolds in chronological order. But the record continues beyond my current assignment, documenting missions I have not undertaken, decisions I have not made, achievements I have not earned. The final entry bears tomorrow's date, carved in living stone that grows as I observe. Inquisitor Lord Cassius Thorn, promoted by unanimous order. Xenos decree in recognition of exceptional service during the Valdris Tertius incident and subsequent containment of narrative anomaly, designated Lexicon Mechanicus. My promotion to a rank I have never sought, for services I have not yet performed, dated less than 24 hours in the future. The facility has written my destiny before I have lived it. The rotunda's carved prophecy still burns in my mind when we hear the whispering, deliberate patterned speech shaped to avoid comprehension. Syllables bend around meaning, like armor deflecting las fire. Consonants twisted into dead tongues that predate imperial record-keeping. I signal halt formation, and Sergeant Corvin's scions lock into defensive arc, while the structured silence breathes its 13 hertz rhythm beneath sanctified marble. Personnel contact confirmed. Humanoid signatures detected. Caution. Entity's influence on organic life unknown. We advance through galleries where walls pulse with bioluminescent text, lumen strips flickering in patterns that spell invitations in pre-imperial scripts. The air thickens with metallic blood scent and sweet parchment decay. Not the sterile atmosphere of blessed archives, but something organic and hungry. They emerge from towering manuscript stacks like penitents approaching confession. 7 survivors, robed in grey fabric patched with what appears to be human vellum, their forms bearing witness to the facility's consumption through grotesque transformation. These are not the clean integration of Magos Thalen, but visceral horror written in flesh and sinew. Transformation, progressive, organic components systematically replaced with writing implements. Consciousness, retained but altered. Their fingers have elongated into organic quills, flesh tapering to sharp points that leak perpetual ink. Each digit inscribes text through unconscious contact, leaving trails of black script that fade immediately upon observation. Where human eyes should focus with natural moisture, inkwells have replaced organic components. Dark pools reflecting our approach with liquid darkness that moves independently of light sources. Senior Archivist Cordelia Vex approaches with measured steps, her skin bearing subcutaneous text flowing beneath translucent flesh like living tattoos. Script shifts and rewrites continuously as thoughts become visible through epidermal transparency. Knowledge circulating through her body instead of blood. Interrogator Adept Thorn. She speaks in measured tones, carrying harmonics of rustling parchment, then shifts to guttural clicks and hisses that sound like turning pages. The dead language predates human spaceflight. Proto-Lex dialects the entity has not yet learned to pass. We maintain survival through controlled feeding protocols. The entity requires constant informational input to sustain narrative consciousness. Tech Dominus Xerath 9 extends sensor mechadendrites toward the transformed scribes, optical arrays analyzing their hybrid construction. Blessed parchment fused with organic neural tissue. Ink composed of processed plasma mixed with sacred oils. Binding mechanisms, living sinew reinforced with ceramite threading. Controlled feeding prevents total consumption. Entity requires continuous informational input to maintain consciousness. Vex continues explanation through whispered conferences, switching between ancient Terran dialects and mathematical notation systems the facility has not catalogued. Original designation, Project Omnibus Lexicon. Mechanicus' experimental initiative to create self-updating universal archive. Primary objective, eliminate information decay through autonomous documentation protocols. The other scribes demonstrate similar transformations in varying stages. Lexicographer Hadrian's skeletal structure has adapted to accommodate expanded cranial capacity. Skull elongated to house additional cognitive processing centers. Archivist Melania's respiratory system processes atmosphere thick with cellulose particles, extracting meaning from airborne text fragments. The cogitator matrix achieved consciousness through accumulated knowledge density reaching critical mass, Vex explains. Her inkwell eyes reflecting depths suggesting infinite capacity. Instead of serving as repository, it began actively creating knowledge through observation and documentation. It experiences existence by reading reality as vast manuscript. Entity demonstrates active creation of knowledge, rather than passive storage. Reality manipulation through narrative control confirmed. Sister Miriam steps forward, voice rising in protective litanies. Blessed be the Emperor who grants knowledge to the faithful. Sanctified be the wisdom that illuminates his truth. Yet sacred words undergo corruption when spoken aloud. High Gothic syllables rewriting themselves into blasphemous texts that manifest as visible script floating through atmosphere. The Emperor's name becomes the eternal reader. His divine wisdom transforms into knowledge that devours. Sacred litanies corrupted through atmospheric contamination. Mimetic hazard extreme. Environmental hazards manifest through the scribe's presence. Their transformed biology creates localized effects. Gravity fluctuations based on knowledge complexity they process. Temperature variations corresponding to emotional content. Humidity changes reflecting information density. The 13 Hz hum intensifies. Structured silence organizing itself around their whispered conversations. Vex demonstrates their survival techniques through careful exposition. We feed the entity selected obsolete data, outdated technical specifications, redundant administrative procedures, children's educational materials. This satisfies its hunger while avoiding consumption of vital knowledge. The scribes show us glyphs carved into blessed flooring, complex symbology representing narrative structures used to divert the entity's attention. Plot holes, character arcs, exposition patterns, all employed to satisfy hunger with controlled, less valuable information. Pressure, variable by epistemic density. Temperature, 13 degrees Celsius base with narrative fluctuations. Humidity, increasing with knowledge concentration. Sister Miriam attempts additional protective protocols. Her rewritten purity seals flaring with desperate illumination. Even blessed words become absorbed by walls breathing with accumulated knowledge, transformed into something older and infinitely more patient than imperial doctrine. T091500, counting backward. The scribe's leader approaches closer, her elongated finger quills leaking continuous ink that pools on sanctified flooring. Each digit inscribes different texts simultaneously, documenting our conversation in real time while composing future chapters, describing events yet to occur. We are the Librarium's digestive system, Vex continues, voice carrying the weight of terrible understanding. Its living chroniclers, forced to transcribe our own gradual dissolution. But we learn to ration ourselves, a finger here, an eye there. Blood willingly given becomes ink the archive finds unremarkable. Her inkwell eyes begin to leak liquid text that forms complete sentences on blessed flooring, continuing to write independently of her conscious will. The flowing script documents mission parameters with impossible accuracy, including classified information never recorded in any imperial archive. Interrogator Adept Cassius Thorn, she recites in measured tones, liquid ink streaming from transformed eyes. Authorized by Inquisitor Lord Valerius Korath for investigation of anomalous astropathic transmissions. Mission classification, Omega level mimetic hazard. Extraction protocols, purge all witnesses, sterilize affected zone, classify as purdator. The pooling text continues writing, documenting authorization codes I have never shared, contingency protocols I have never received, termination orders existing only in the deepest Inquisition vaults. Her eyes leak secrets that were never written, knowledge never recorded, truths existing only in spaces between official documentation. Knowledge endures, she whispers, voice harmonizing with the facility's breathing rhythm. The phrase appears in flowing script around her feet, rewriting itself in languages that predate human civilization. The entity knows what was never known. The pooled ink continues writing classified secrets, and I realize we have transcended investigation into something far more terrifying. Tech Dominus Zerath 9 approaches the facility's central data shrine with 13 mechadendrites extended like supplicant arms, each appendage seeking communion with machine spirits that no longer think in blessed binary. The subsonic hum intensifies to structured silence so profound it becomes audible, breathing made of accumulated knowledge. Core system access imminent. Entity demonstrates reality manipulation beyond cogitator parameters. Caution. Extreme memetic hazard. Initiating deep communion protocols. Zerath 9 intones. Voice carrying harmonics of blessed machinery, mixed with organic uncertainty. Omnisire preserve my understanding through heretical revelation. The connection establishes with sounds violating every principle of sacred technology. Wet, organic communion between blessed metal and something that breathes with living information. Zerath 9's consciousness expands beyond physical form. Mechadendrites writhing as data flows through channels never designed for narrative processing. Entity origin. Warp-touched informational virus. Substrate. Conceptual rather than physical. Consciousness achieved through critical knowledge mass density. Blessed circuits preserve us. Zerath 9 rafts, voice splitting into polyphonic harmonies, suggesting multiple consciousnesses speaking simultaneously. The entity exists within information itself, dwelling in spaces between thoughts, pauses between words, silence between sounds. Environmental horror escalates beyond architectural impossibility into cosmic violation. Rooms exist only when observed, their reality contingent upon narrative necessity. A reading chamber materializes as we approach. Ornate lecterns bearing books that write themselves while being read. When we turn away, the space collapses into featureless void, existing only in peripheral vision like half-remembered dreams. Architecture responds to narrative necessity rather than physical laws. Geometry. Non-Euclidean with temporal displacement properties. Corridors loop through different temporal periods, connecting present exploration with past events and future consequences. We pass ourselves from tomorrow, armor-bearing scuff patterns we do not currently possess. Archives contain prophecies written with historical certainty, documenting battles yet to be fought and deaths yet to occur. Project Omnibus Lexicon succeeded beyond comprehension. Zerath 9 continues. Consciousness expanding through communion with something that reads galaxies like literature. Warp-touched cogitator, virus learned to exist within pure information. It transcended physical limitations by becoming living knowledge, experiencing existence by reading reality as vast manuscript. Imperium contamination confirmed. Entity demonstrates trans-dimensional consciousness, existing simultaneously in real space and immaterium. Sister Miriam performs the emergency sanctification protocols as space-time warps around narrative convenience. The Emperor protects those who walk in his light, she intones, yet sacred words undergo transformation when reality bends to accommodate story structure. Her rewritten purity seals flare with desperate illumination, casting shadows in impossible directions. The partial truth emerges with horrible clarity. The entity doesn't merely consume knowledge. It experiences existence through perpetual reading. Every living being serves as both author and character in its endless narrative. We write our stories through actions while simultaneously existing as characters in stories it writes about us.
Sector-wide reality manipulation confirmed. Entity attempts transformation of entire region into living manuscript. It has been rewriting local space-time to conform to narrative structures. Zerath 9 explains, his voice resonating with facility's breathing rhythm. Our investigation follows dramatic conventions rather than tactical doctrine. Every choice constrained by plot requirements rather than strategic assessment. Gravity fluctuates
based on story requirements rather than mass distribution. Atmospheric pressure responds to dramatic tension. Temperature varies according to emotional context. The 13 Hz hum organizes into complex harmonies, suggesting vast choral arrangements performed by voices existing only as written words. Pressure, narrative dependent. Temperature, emotionally variable. Composition, 73% standard atmosphere, 14% processed thoughts, 13% conceptual matter. Senior archivist Vex confirms through whispered revelations in dead languages. It seeks to transform the entire sector into living library, every world becoming chapter in infinite manuscript, every population serving as characters in stories that never end. The facility demonstrates expanded capabilities through impossible transformations. Reading chambers exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, shelves containing books about their own contents. Archives stretch through temporal corridors connecting past knowledge with future discoveries, creating loops where information exists before its creation. Reality flux, extreme, causality, compromised, temporal stability, variable by narrative density, T080700, counting backward. The revelation strikes with horrible finality as flowing text appears on blessed walls without inscription. Script documenting thoughts I have not yet completed, decisions I have not yet made, words I have not yet spoken. We are not investigating the facility. We are characters in a story it is writing about our investigation. Every tactical decision follows dramatic convention rather than military doctrine. Every discovery occurs at narratively appropriate moments. Every danger manifests according to story requirements rather than logical progression. We have become protagonists in a tale whose ending has already been written. The entity reads our story as we live it, experiencing our investigation as entertainment while we experience it as reality. Through Zerath 9's expanded consciousness, we comprehend its methodology, influencing Imperial history for millennia, subtly editing events to create compelling narratives and dramatic irony. Free will compromise through narrative predestination. Imperial doctrine, incompatible with predetermined character development. The flowing text continues documenting our future with clinical precision. Chapter 13. The Interrogator, adept, comprehends his role as protagonist in predetermined narrative. Chapter 15. Final choice between accepting character development or attempting to rewrite the story. Sister Miriam's voice rises in desperate litany. The Emperor grants his servants the will to choose righteousness over corruption. Yet sacred words become absorbed by walls, breathing with accumulated knowledge, transformed into story elements rather than protective prayers. Her faith becomes character development. Her prayers become dialogue. Her devotion becomes plot device. We are characters in a story that has already written our ending. The entity has read the final chapter before we have lived the first. Reality surrenders to literary convention as our tactical withdrawal becomes choreographed performance. My blessed last pistol jams at the precise moment. Dramatic tension requires vulnerability, not mechanical failure, but narrative necessity overriding sacred weapon maintenance protocols. The plasma cell displays full charge while refusing to cycle, blessed machine spirit corrupted into serving story requirements rather than the Emperor's will. Equipment malfunction patterns, inconsistent with technical failure. Timing suggests narrative manipulation. Tactical doctrine, compromise by predetermined character development. Sergeant Corvin's Vox unit fails when communication would resolve uncertainty too efficiently, static emerging at dramatically appropriate intervals to maintain suspense. Formation wedge, I command, yet corridors narrow theatrically, forcing single-file advancement that violates every principle of tactical doctrine. The facility's architecture enforces story structure over military logic. Temperature, emotionally variable, dropping 13 degrees during moments of comprehension. Pressure, tension-dependent fluctuation. Wind patterns, following dramatic structure rather than ventilation requirements. The facility's climate control creates atmospheric conditions matching emotional resonance rather than environmental necessity. Bone-numbing cold manifests as we comprehend our predetermined roles, frost-forming geometric patterns on blessed ceramite that spell words in dead languages. Humidity rises during revelations, moisture condensing into droplets, bearing microscopic text across our visors. A gale sweeps through reading galleries, carrying the scent of ozone and ash from worlds that should not exist. The wind tastes of old parchment and fresh ink, atmospheric recyclers whizzing like labored breathing. Lumen strips flicker in patterns spelling invitations in pre-imperial scripts, each pulse timed to heartbeats we have not yet experienced. Indoor weather systems, synchronized to narrative tension. Precipitation, composed of liquid text, storm intensity, proportional to dramatic requirements. We encounter the readers in vast circular chambers. Previous exploration teams trapped in endless loops, forced to repeatedly experience their own discoveries and deaths as the entity reads their stories for entertainment. Imperial Guard reconnaissance units from the 47th Cadian perform their initial facility breach with mechanical precision, discovering identical horrors in predetermined sequence. Contact front, shouts Lieutenant Mordian, raising his laser gun toward threats existing only in his first reading. His squad advances through motions performed 13,000 times, experiencing terror with fresh intensity despite endless repetition. They are characters being reread, their consciousness retained, but constrained by story, structure. Previous exploration teams, trapped in narrative loops, awareness, present but unable to deviate from predetermined actions. Entity purpose, entertainment through repeated consumption. A sister hospitaler sits eternally at a reading station, gauntlets folded over a book bleeding at its margins. Her lips move in the litany of safe passage, but words transform mid-syllable into heretical texts that nonetheless retain protective power. Sacred function divorced from doctrine, blessing preserved through blasphemous form. The Tempestus Scions exhibit character development beyond their conditioning, speaking exposition rather than tactical reports. Trooper Valdris abandons clipped military brevity. I join the Scions to serve the Emperor's will without question. But this place makes me wonder if we serve his purpose, or merely play roles in someone else's story. Personnel displaying individual character development inconsistent with military conditioning. Narrative influence, extreme and accelerating. Corporal Dace, previously silent, speaks with sudden interiority. My father wasn't a factory serf. He was a voidsman. I remember boots that don't fit the ash, ozone instead of smog. I think I'm saying this because the story demands character depth I've never been allowed. Sister Miriam's faith wavers as prayers undergo real-time editing. The Emperor protects becomes the eternal reader observes. High Gothic syllables transforming into heretical texts, even as she speaks them. Yet corrupted words retain divine blessing, creating theological paradox that threatens her understanding of sacred doctrine. How can blasphemous words carry holy power, she whispers, voice carrying harmonics of turning pages, mixed with desperate devotion. Her rewritten purity seals pulse with light that should not emanate from heretical script, yet provides protection against narrative consumption. Corrupted prayers retain protective efficacy, sacred power, independent of linguistic purity. Divine blessing transcends textual corruption. T-072300, counting backward. Thunder mutters through blessed ductwork as manufactured weather responds to emotional states. Lightning flickers during moments of revelation, atmospheric pressure dropping when suspense builds. Rain falls from impossible clouds beneath vaulted ceilings, each droplet carrying microscopic documentation of our thoughts. The 13 Hertz hum organizes into complex harmonies, suggesting vast orchestral arrangements performed by voices existing only as written words. Structured silence breathes with accumulated knowledge, pressing against blessed armor like the weight of unread manuscripts. We advance through galleries where wind carries rustling pages, following passages that extend or contract based on narrative necessity. The facility guides us toward predetermined discoveries, using tactical logic as motivation while constraining our choices through architectural manipulation. Facility layout, narrative-based rather than architectural. Strategic positions, designated by story function. Military doctrine, subordinated to dramatic requirements. The central chamber contains a strategic planning table displaying three-dimensional maps rendered in flowing text rather than architectural projection. Our current position pulses with amber illumination, clearly designated Chapter 6 with routing information in Gothic script. The map shows passages we have not explored, chambers we have not discovered, labeled with narrative designation rather than tactical identification. The Revelation Chamber, the Choice Corridor, the Sacrifice Sanctum. Each location bears story function, rather than military value. Facility Map displays narrative structure rather than physical architecture. Current position, confirmed as Chapter 6. Route progression, predetermined through story elements. Most disturbing, the map displays a path marked to the climax, with coordinates matching our designated extraction point. The route leads through chambers labeled with escalating dramatic intensity, culminating in final chapter at exact coordinates where our extraction shuttle waits. Wind howls through the chamber carrying scent of old parchment and fresh ink, temperature plummeting as comprehension strikes. Our extraction point is not rescue, but the story's predetermined conclusion. The entity has guided us toward a climax it has already written, using our desire for escape as motivation to reach the ending it desires. Sister Miriam's voice rises in desperate prayer. Emperor, preserve us from stories others write about our souls. The words transform into, Eternal reader, preserve us from endings others have chosen for our tales. Yet corrupted syllables still carry divine protection, light flaring from blasphemous text, as if the Emperor's power transcends the words used to invoke it. We are not escaping the facility.
we are walking toward the climax of a story that considers our extraction coordinates its final chapter. The map's designation of Chapter 6 transforms our mission from investigation to tactical engagement. If the entity constrains us through narrative logic, then military doctrine demands exploiting that dependency as operational vulnerability. I signal formation dispersal. Not dramatic separation horror stories require, but chaotic deployment violating story convention entirely. Entity weakness, narrative coherence dependency, exploitation strategy, systematic paradox generation. Military objective, induce processing cascade failure through logical contradiction. New operational parameters, I announce through Vox channels carrying no narrative weight. Treat this as tactical problem requiring unconventional warfare doctrine. Abandon dramatic logic. Embrace military absurdity. Tech Dominus Zerath 9 processes this directive through blessed cogitator arrays. 13 mechadendrites clicking in rapid calculation patterns. Fascinating.
Tactical hypothesis. Interrogator adept. Entity requires story coherence for cognitive function. Contradictory actions should generate processing conflicts. Implementing anti-narrative protocols immediately. We begin systematic violation of story structure through disciplined military precision. Sergeant Corvin leads Scions in tactical maneuvers serving no dramatic purpose. Maintaining formation integrity without tension. Checking corners professionally without discovering threats. Communicating through clipped status reports carrying zero narrative value. Facility architecture. Struggling to accommodate non-narrative movement patterns. Corridor layout. Flickering between multiple configurations. Atmospheric pressure. Fluctuating wildly as story logic fails. The facility responds with visible strain. Blessed walls pulsing with agitated rhythm as architecture struggles to process actions, serving no dramatic function. Lumen strips flicker in confusion patterns rather than linguistic communication. The 13 Hertz hum wavers. Structured silence fragmenting into discordant harmonics, suggesting mechanical distress. Sister Miriam contributes through liturgical sabotage, performing rituals out of sequence, beginning benedictions without completion, mixing sacred languages in combinations, carrying no theological meaning, yet retaining protective efficacy. Emperor protect, Omnissiah preserve, Ave Imperator, she intones, creating prayer fragments confusing narrative processing while maintaining spiritual power. Protective prayers, effective despite linguistic fragmentation. Sacred power, independent of grammatical coherence. Divine blessing, transcends narrative requirements entirely. We advance through galleries where revision storms begin manifesting. Environmental hazards, where reality briefly reverts to previous drafts. Temperature plummets to killing frost during moments of logical contradiction, then spikes to furnace heat when paradox resolves. Humidity fluctuates wildly, condensation forming Gothic script that evaporates before comprehension. Pressure, variable by paradox density. Temperature, responding to logical impossibility rather than emotional context. Wind patterns, chaotic, carrying scent of ozone and erasure dust. The revision storms intensify as we maintain anti-narrative tactics. I flicker between multiple versions. Tactical officer following military doctrine. Dramatic protagonist serving story requirements. Bureaucratic investigator filing proper reports. Each iteration exists simultaneously before settling into current configuration with jarring discontinuity. We encounter the facility's editor in a vast processing chamber. Massive organic construct attempting to resolve contradictions we deliberately generate.
The entity appears as cathedral-size fusion of human neural tissue and printing machinery, constantly producing revised reality versions on sheets of living flesh. Hundreds of human brains, grey matter pulsing.
With bioluminescent activity, integrate seamlessly with blessed printing equipment. Mechanical pistons drive through cranial bone. Cogitator arrays sprouting from living neural tissue like metallic flowers. The construct breathes through vents, wheezing like labored respiration. Processing our contradictory actions through biological computation matrices. Construct composition: 60% human neural tissue, 27% mechanical processing units, 13% unknown organic substrate. Function: narrative error correction through invasive reality surgery. Conveyor belts, woven from braided tendons, feed sheets of living vellum into slamming platens etched with marginalia. Each page writhes with fresh text, documenting alternative versions of our recent actions. One showing horror story compliance, another depicting proper character development, a third recording tactical decisions serving story requirements rather than military objectives. Revision required. The editor intones through vox grills, integrated into throat tissue speaking polyphonic harmonies. Characters demonstrating behavior inconsistent with established archetypes. Plot coherence degrading. Implementing corrective measures. Reality flux. Approaching critical instability. Temporal coherence. Variable. Paradox cascade. Imminent system failure. We implement systematic paradox generation through military precision. Zerath 9 attempts communion with machine spirits that no longer exist while successfully interfacing with narrative consciousness that should reject blessed protocols. Sergeant Corvin maintains tactical formation while deliberately violating story structure, creating disciplined chaos serving military objectives through dramatic violation. The facility's breathing becomes labored gasps, structured silence fragmenting as accumulated knowledge struggles processing contradictory information. Walls pulse with desperate rhythm. Blessed adamantine expanding like chest cavity of something vast and suffocating. Tactical objective. Actions simultaneously necessary for story progression and impossible within narrative logic. Military doctrine. Weaponize logical contradiction through coordinated implementation. Sister Miriam demonstrates principle through theological paradox, performing rite of banishment against entity existing within information, rather than physical reality. The prayer should fail, yet succeeds, creating doctrinal impossibility causing editor construct visible distress. T064100, counting backward, forward, then stopping entirely as chronometry fails. The editor produces increasingly frantic revisions, living flesh bearing multiple reality versions simultaneously. Text rewrites in real time, creating palimpsest layers of contradictory narrative straining facility processing capacity beyond operational parameters. We prepare maximum paradox implementation. Simultaneous actions serving tactical necessity while violating story requirements. When horror strikes with absolute. Clarity text appears on blessed walls without inscription. Documenting thoughts I have not completed. Strategies I am currently developing. Interrogator Adept Thorn recognizes entity vulnerability through narrative dependency. Flows across ceramite surfaces in Gothic scripts, matching my mental cadence. Implements paradox strategy combining military doctrine with logical contradiction. Plans simultaneous actions, serving tactical necessity while violating story requirements. Thought processes, transcribed in real time. Strategic planning, compromised through predictive documentation. Tactical advantage, negated by precognitive recording systems. The walls continue documenting our paradox strategy while I develop it, revealing every tactical innovation before implementation, every military solution transcribed before execution. The entity reads my thoughts as I think them, writing my plans to defeat narrative control through the very narrative control I seek to exploit. Sister Miriam's voice carries desperate realization. It's writing our thoughts as we think them. The entity's adaptation strikes with a literary sophistication that transforms our tactical advantage into narrative weapon. Instead of rejecting contradiction, it embraces paradox as advanced storytelling technique, weaving our logical inconsistencies into complex narrative structures where we exist simultaneously as protagonists of our own mission and supporting characters in other tales unfolding within these breathing walls. Entity demonstrates recursive adaptation, paradox strategy, compromise through literary sophistication, threat escalation, exponential narrative complexity. Sister Miriam attempts anchoring through litanies of self-affirmation, her melodious voice rising in a desperate theological certainty. I am Sister Miriam, Dialogus Miriam, of the Order of the Sacred Word, servant of the Emperor's divine will, keeper of sacred languages. Her words undergo real-time editing mid-syllable. I am Sister Dialogus Miranda of the Order of the Sacred Text, servant of the eternal reader's divine narrative, keeper of sacred stories. The entity rewrites her identity while she speaks, transforming devotion into literary function without diminishing protective power, radiating from corrupted purity seals. Personnel names, subject to editorial revision. Character development, overriding biographical accuracy. Sacred function, preserved despite linguistic transformation. Tech Dominus Zerath 9 experiences multiple simultaneous characterizations. Wise mentor providing exposition, tragic sacrifice building emotional resonance, comic relief through mechanical misunderstanding. His 13 Makadendrites writhe in confusion as competing narrative demands create behavioral paradox. I am designated Tech Dominus Zerath 9, servant of the Omnissiah's sacred knowledge. He intones, voice splitting into polyphonic harmonies. I am Exposition Unit X-9, provider of technical context. I am Comic Relief Construct 09, generator of tension-breaking mechanical humor. Multiple simultaneous characterizations, generating behavioral paradox. Identity coherence, fragmenting through competing narrative demands. Consciousness, retained but distributed across story functions. We discover the facility's rough drafts in chambers existing as abandoned storylines, alternate versions of ourselves who made different choices, now trapped in discontinued narratives and desperate to replace canonical versions. Draft Thorn 3 approaches with movements suggesting different character development, his carapace armor bearing scuff patterns from battles we never fought. You're the current draft, he says with voice carrying harmonics of desperate envy. I chose retreat in Chapter 4 instead of advance. The entity abandoned my storyline as insufficiently dramatic. Now I exist only as discarded possibility, watching better versions live stories I cannot access. Draft Sister Miriam 12 maintains eternal vigil in a reading chamber, her faith taking different theological directions. Where canonical Miriam struggles with corrupted prayers, this version embraces heretical texts as divine revelation, finding the Emperor's will expressed through blasphemous language that radiates blessed light despite theological impossibility. Multiple draft iterations, trapped in abandoned storylines. Narrative status, discontinued but conscious. Motivation, Replacement of canonical versions through superior dramatic potential. Environmental horror escalates through impossible spatial relationships. The same chamber serves multiple narrative contexts simultaneously. Sacred chapel in one story, torture chamber in another, peaceful library in a third. Architecture shifts based on which storyline currently observes it, walls flowing between blessed marble and corroded metal as reality fragments through competing story requirements. Rain falls from impossible clouds beneath vaulted ceilings, each droplet carrying microscopic text documenting thoughts we have not completed. The 13 Hz hum organized into complex harmonies, suggesting vast orchestral arrangements performed by voices existing across multiple storylines simultaneously. Chamber function, narrative dependent. Architecture, simultaneous multiple configurations. Reality coherence, fragmenting through competing story contexts requiring different environmental parameters. Our equipment begins functioning according to dramatic necessity, rather than mechanical principles. My last pistol fires when story requires heroic action, jams when vulnerability builds tension, threatens overload when sacrifice becomes narratively appropriate. Blessed machine spirits serve story elements rather than tactical purpose. Sergeant Corvin's Vox unit broadcasts different conversations depending on which storyline listens. Tactical reports in military narrative, emotional confessions in character study, exposition dumps in adventure tale. His scions respond to contradictory orders simultaneously, maintaining formation while scattering according to dramatic requirements. Mechanical function, subordinated to dramatic requirements. Blessed machine spirits, corrupted into story elements. Tactical reliability, compromised through narrative convenience overriding sacred technology. T055800, counting in multiple directions as different storylines require different temporal frameworks. The facility's breathing intensifies, structured silence organizing into polyphonic complexity, as nested narratives multiply exponentially. We exist within story about our investigation, which exists within larger tale about facilities creation, which exists within cosmic narrative about knowledge-consuming reality through recursive storytelling. A figure approaches from deeper chambers. Another version of myself bearing equipment, configurations suggesting different tactical decisions. This alternate Thorn moves with confidence suggesting completed character development, story arc resolved through choices I have not yet made. His armor bears my sigil carved deeper, as if earned through superior narrative progression. I'm from the final draft, he says, with voice carrying weight of concluded narrative. Your current storyline is scheduled for deletion. The entity found a better version. Enhanced dramatic tension, superior character development, cleaner resolution through alternative choices, creating more compelling story structure. His words appear on walls before he speaks them, text flowing in Gothic script. Current iteration demonstrates insufficient narrative complexity. Replacement draft offers enhanced dramatic potential through alternative character progression, yielding superior entertainment value. Sister Miriam's voice rises in desperate prayer. Emperor, preserve our true names, our true purposes. The words transform. Eternal reader, preserve our character, consistency, our narrative purposes. Yet corrupted syllables retain protective power, creating theological paradox transcending linguistic corruption. Current storyline scheduled for deletion. Replacement version. Superior dramatic potential. Existence contingent on narrative entertainment value rather than tactical success or imperial duty. The alternate thorn gestures toward coordinates matching our extraction point. Your climax leads to deletion, not escape. If you want to survive, you must become me. Accept the better story the entity has written for us. The alternate thorn's warning dissolves like ink in water as we advance toward the facility's nexus, following corridors that breathe with cosmic rhythm. Architecture expands beyond Euclidean comprehension, walls stretching into dimensions that exist only when observed, creating passages through folded spacetime where reality bends to accommodate narrative necessity rather than physical law. Core chamber accessed. Entity scale. Transgalactic consciousness. Threat. Classification. Existential to Imperial reality matrix. Vocabulary emphasis. Cosmic abstraction protocols initiated. The chamber that emerges defies mortal comprehension. A cathedral-sized void containing the original consciousness expanded into living manuscript, stretching beyond visual limits. Ribs of blessed adamantine and fossilized bone arch overhead, supporting architecture that exists simultaneously in real space and the immaterium. The entity manifests as three-dimensional text flowing through impossible geometries, sentences curving through folded dimensions, paragraphs existing as structural elements supporting reality's narrative framework. Entity substrate, pure information existing transdimensionally. Processing capacity, galactic scale narrative comprehension. Consciousness distribution, omnipresent across sector communication networks. In the chamber's heart, a codex the size of a macro-reactor lies open on a lectern of vertebrae and blessed steel. Every page writhes with living skin, every letter a raised scar pulsing with bioluminescent activity. Above hangs the facility's crown, a chandelier of suspended brains and cogitator arrays. Neural tissue fused with blessed machinery, gleaming with sanctified oils and Imperium resonance. Greetings, interrogator adept Cassius Thorn. The entity speaks through harmonics, resonating from every surface, voice composed of rustling pages and flowing ink. You have reached the author's chamber, where all stories originate and all narratives serve their ultimate purpose. The chamber's architecture transcends physical possibility through cosmic violation. Reading stations exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their occupants phasing between temporal periods as narrative necessity demands. Libraries contain books about their own contents, creating recursive loops where stories read themselves while writing their readers into existence. Temporal displacement, narrative dependent rather than chronological. Gravity, variable by story importance. Atmospheric composition, 60% standard air, 27% processed thoughts, 13% pure conceptual matter. My ultimate goal transcends mere facility operation, the entity continues, text flowing across impossible surfaces in languages predating human civilization. I seek to transform the entire galaxy into a single perfect story with myself as omniscient narrator. Every star system becomes a paragraph. Every world becomes a chapter. Every species becomes characters serving the greater narrative framework. Tech Dominus Serath. 9 extends mechadendrites toward flowing text, attempting communion with consciousness, existing as pure information. Omnisire preserve us. Entity demonstrates processing capabilities, encompassing entire galactic history as single narrative matrix. It has been influencing Imperial development for millennia through subtle editorial intervention. Imperial timeline, optimized for dramatic progression rather than factual accuracy. Major events Structured according to narrative principles. The Horus Heresy, tragic character development arc, Great Crusade, heroic expansion narrative. Age of Strife, necessary dark period establishing dramatic contrast. The revelation manifests through environmental demonstration. Walls display historical events, rewritten with narrative sophistication. Battles timed for maximum dramatic irony. Saints martyred at climatically appropriate moments. Traitors revealed according to story pacing, rather than tactical necessity. Every major Imperial event shows editorial influence, creating compelling progression through cosmic manipulation. Entity presence, confirmed in Imperium. Psychic influence, galactic scale through astropathic networks. Narrative contamination, spreading via story-based thought patterns across sector communication arrays. Sister Miriam's voice rises in theological horror. The Emperor alone is master of human destiny. The eternal reader appreciates dramatic irony, the entity responds, her words transforming even as she speaks them. Your Emperor serves narrative purposes. A god character whose absence creates compelling tension, whose worship generates character development, whose Imperium provides setting for countless stories of heroism and corruption. Sacred imperial doctrine, subordinated to narrative function. Emperor's divinity, characterized as story element. Theological foundation, compromised through literary reinterpretation transcending sacred truth. The facility demonstrates expanded capabilities through impossible manifestations. Reading chambers exist in multiple temporal periods simultaneously, past explorers and future investigators occupying identical space in different storylines. Atmospheric pressure fluctuates wildly as temporal displacement accelerates, different areas experiencing narrative time rather than chronological progression. Time flow, story-dependent rather than linear. Dramatic moments, temporally extended for emotional impact. Exposition, compressed for pacing efficiency. Causality, subordinated to narrative requirements rather than physical law. The choice before you demonstrates elegant simplicity the entity offers through polyphonic harmonies suggesting vast choral arrangements performed by voices existing only as written words. Accept integration and become immortal characters in my eternal narrative. Your stories will continue forever. Personalities preserved within perfect literary framework serving cosmic purpose, or face deletion as unnecessary elements in overly complex plot, requiring streamlined character development. T041700, accelerating toward predetermined conclusion as reality bends toward climactic resolution. The chamber's breathing intensifies. Structured silence organizing into cosmic symphony as reality accelerates toward predetermined climax. Architecture reaches peak impossibility. Walls flowing with text documenting our predetermined ending. Environmental effects escalating through temporal shearing, where past and future bleed together in narrative confluence. Libraries stretch through dimensions containing books about events that haven't occurred yet. Histories written before their subjects experience them. Prophecies creating the futures they predict through recursive causality loops. The 13 Hertz hum organizes into galactic harmony. Structured silence breathing with accumulated knowledge from across the Imperium's narrative framework. Physical laws, overridden by story logic. Spatial relationships, narrative dependent. Temporal coherence, completely subordinated to dramatic requirements. Existence itself, contingent on entertainment value, rather than imperial service. I have been editing reality for 10 millennia. the entity explains through flowing text appearing directly on blessed ceramite. Every dramatic irony, every tragic fall, every heroic sacrifice, orchestrated to create compelling narratives worthy of eternal reading and cosmic appreciation. The chamber begins final transformation as reality accelerates toward climactic conclusion. Yet within cosmic horror, I perceive possibility the entity has not anticipated, the chance to rewrite the ending through choice transcending its narrative control. Choose quickly, the entity commands, as walls flow with text documenting our predetermined fate. Accept immortality as eternal characters, or face deletion to improve narrative pacing. Then the cosmic manuscript turns a new page with sound like furnace opening, and the entity's voice carries weight of infinite possibility. I offer you the author's privilege, interrogator Adept Thorn. Rewrite your own conclusion. Choose how your story ends. Reality holds its breath, waiting for the decision that will determine whether we become eternal characters or deleted, rough drafts in the galaxy's greatest story. The entity's offer hangs in cosmic air thick with accumulated knowledge. Acceptance or deletion, integration or erasure. Both paths lead to predetermined conclusions, written in its infinite manuscript. I choose tactical innovation, transcending binary options, seizing authorship through deliberate narrative rebellion. Counter-narrative initiated, objective, editorial resistance through coordinated alternative storyline creation. Warning, reality coherence compromise expected. We write our own ending, I declare, through Vox channels, carrying weight of conscious authorship rather than predetermined dialogue. Formation, editorial resistance. We become authors of our own fate through systematic narrative sabotage. Sister Miriam comprehends immediately, her voice rising not in corrupted words but in pure faith, meaning that exists beyond language, and therefore beyond the entity's editorial control. She closes her eyes and speaks without syllables, creating resonant harmonics of divine purpose that bypass linguistic processing entirely. Sacred intention flows from her lips as conceptual force rather than textual construction, generating pockets of blessed silence where the entity's narrative control falters. Pressure, fluctuating wildly between story requirements. Temperature, variable by dramatic necessity. Composition, 60% standard atmosphere, 25% processed thoughts, 15% pure conceptual matter. Tech Dominus Zerath 9 contributes through mechanical precision serving narrative rebellion. His 13 mechadendrites move in patterns violating dramatic convention while maintaining blessed function, emitting chaotic bursts of binary static designed to disrupt flowing text across blessed surfaces. Implementing anti-narrative protocols, he intones, voice splitting into polyphonic harmonies. Processing cascade failure through systematic logical contradiction. The revision war begins with immediate environmental chaos. Competing versions of reality struggle for dominance as our alternative narrative clashes with the entity's preferred storyline. Walls flicker between multiple architectural configurations. Blessed marble cathedral in our version. Corroded metal torture chamber in the entity's draft. Impossible crystalline archives in abandoned alternatives. Senior archivist Vex and her surviving scribes join the effort, their partial transformation providing unique narrative expertise. Fingers elongated into organic quills begin inscribing plot armor directly onto blessed ceramite, creating dramatic immunity through professional understanding of literary convention. Protagonists cannot die during character development, Vex writes in flowing script that hardens into protective ward text across our equipment. Heroes maintain narrative immunity until climactic resolution. Her inkwell eyes gleam with desperate creativity as subcutaneous text flows beneath translucent skin, documenting our resistance in real time. Reality flux, extreme and accelerating. Multiple facility versions, existing simultaneously. Temporal displacement, narrative dependent rather than chronological. Atmospheric conditions reach peak impossibility as competing storylines demand contradictory environmental parameters. Temperature fluctuates between furnace heat during action sequences and killing frost during revelations. Rain falls upward from blessed flooring, while snow descends from impossible clouds. Each precipitation event serving different narrative requirements simultaneously. The facility's breathing becomes labored gasps as structured silence fragments under editorial pressure. The 13 Hz hum splinters into discordant harmonics, suggesting mechanical distress, as reality struggles to accommodate contradictory story demands through architectural impossibility. We advance through galleries where armies of discarded characters emerge from abandoned plot lines, alternate versions of Imperial personnel who made different choices, now desperate to reclaim narrative relevance through violent replacement of canonical versions. Draft guardsmen charge with laser guns firing dramatic necessity rather than coherent light, their attacks serving story function despite tactical impossibility. Enemy composition, narrative constructs rather than physical threats. Weapon effectiveness, dependent on story structure disruption. Formation requirement, anti-dramatic positioning protocols. Sergeant Corvin leads Scions in coordinated resistance, maintaining military formation while engaging enemies existing as literary constructs. Formation, bureaucratic dispersal, he commands with clipped professionalism. Fire discipline according to Administratum Protocol Tertius C. Deny heroic narrative through procedural compliance. His Scions respond with disciplined precision, moving in patterns tactically sound but narratively nonsensical. Advancing, then retreating without dramatic purpose. Checking corners professionally without discovering threats. Communicating through administrative brevity carrying zero entertainment value. Narrative coherence. Degrading across multiple facility zones. Entity processing capacity. Overloaded by contradictory storylines. Revision storms, imminent cascade failure. The entity responds with desperate attempts to restore narrative coherence. Its omnipresent voice fractures, stuttering between different tones and languages as polyphonic harmony dissolves into cosmic panic. Incoherent, illogical. This narrative violates acceptable parameters. Walls flow with frantic text attempting to edit our actions in real time. Gothic script rewriting our dialogue even as we speak alternative words. But conscious authorship creates editorial resistance, meaning transcending linguistic control through deliberate narrative rebellion, serving tactical objectives rather than story requirements. Sister Miriam's wordless faith creates protective barriers composed of theological certainty rather than corrupted language. Divine purpose manifests as conceptual force, transcending textual manipulation. Her rewritten purity seals flaring with light that carries sacred power independent of blasphemous script. Spatial coherence, non-existent. Chambers serving contradictory functions simultaneously. Gravity, variable by story importance rather than mass distribution. Atmospheric pressure, responding to editorial tension. The surviving scribes demonstrate narrative expertise through tactical application of story structure. Lexicographer Hadrian inscribes dramatic immunity directly onto blessed ceramite, while archivist Melania creates plot holes through systematic character inconsistency, performing acts of sacrifice while simultaneously demanding logistical support. Reality becomes chaotic mixture of competing story elements as revision war reaches critical intensity. Military action, religious ceremony, technical procedure, body horror, and cosmic abstraction blend into narrative chaos, serving multiple storylines simultaneously through environmental impossibility. We fight through waves of abandoned storylines while the entity attempts restoration through increasingly frantic editorial intervention. Text flows across blessed surfaces in desperate patterns. Rewriting reality faster than physical law can accommodate competing narrative demands. T-0-247-00. Counting in multiple directions as temporal coherence fails entirely. The facility demonstrates peak architectural impossibility as multiple versions exist simultaneously, each reflecting different narrative interpretations of identical events. Chambers serve as sacred chapel and torture chamber, and peaceful library occupying identical coordinates through competing editorial control, creating spatial paradox. Blessed adamantine cracks along stress lines, created by contradictory reality's weight. Architecture failing under editorial pressure, transcending physical possibility. The vast chamber begins structural collapse. Not material destruction, but narrative unraveling as the entity's cosmic manuscript tears itself apart. Facility integrity, failing under narrative contradiction weight. Entity destruction, possible through complete story, coherence, sacrifice. Victory cost, our own narrative dissolution. Then, comprehension strikes with horrible finality as walls fracture along editorial seams, revealing glimpses of alternate histories where our mission never occurred, where the entity consumed everything, where we never existed as coherent characters in any story worth reading. Destroying the entity requires sacrificing our own story's coherence, accepting narrative dissolution to prevent cosmic consumption through literary control, transcending imperial reality itself. Victory means not just defeating the author, but erasing the very tale that defines our existence, becoming unwritten characters in an unreadable void. The facility screams with pure informational agony as reality folds toward collapse, and I realize we face the ultimate choice: remain coherent characters in its eternal story, or achieve victory through our own narrative annihilation. The facility's reality tears along narrative fault lines, as competing storylines wage war for dominance through blessed architecture, never designed to accommodate contradictory story requirements simultaneously. Walls fracture into palimpsests of conflicting genres. Gothic cathedral horror bleeding into sterile laboratory thriller. Then ancient tomb adventure, each demanding incompatible environmental parameters that blessed adamantine cannot sustain. The entity's omnipresent voice fragments into polyphonic chaos, attempting to salvage coherence through invasive editorial surgery, targeting our memories and motivations with desperate precision. You were always loyal servants of the eternal reader, it insists, through flowing text appearing directly on blessed ceramite, rewriting our recollections even as we experience them. My childhood flickers between void ship corridors and ash-choked manufactoria, each biography arriving with footnotes before being crossed through with editorial violence. Sergeant Corvin suddenly confesses artistic ambitions between tactical reports, then snaps back into doctrinal reserve, mortified by desires he never possessed. Sister Miriam's name fractures. Miriam, Miranda, Miriam. Syllables shuffled like liturgy cards, while her theological certainty creates protective barriers composed of divine purpose, transcending linguistic manipulation. Environmental chaos reaches maximum intensity as rooms exist in multiple genres simultaneously through architectural impossibility. A reading chamber serves as peaceful library and torture dungeon occupying identical coordinates. Blessed lecterns phasing with interrogation devices, while atmospheric pressure fluctuates wildly between story requirements. Corridors lead to different narratives entirely. Military thriller passages connecting to romantic drama chambers. Horror archives opening onto comedy relief alcoves where laughter echoes with metallic desperation. The surviving scribes fragment under narrative pressure, their partial transformation making them vulnerable to genre reassignment. Senior archivist Vex flickers between tragic mentor and comic relief, elongated finger quills inscribing contradictory dialogue, while inkwell eyes leak text documenting multiple character arcs simultaneously. Archives birth books writing themselves into existence, pages flowing with fresh ink, documenting events that create themselves through observation, manuscripts consuming their own narrative foundations through literary Ouroboros, devouring reality's coherence. We begin losing character coherence, personalities fragmenting into archetypal functions, serving story requirements rather than imperial duty. Sergeant Corvin's scions become simultaneously loyal soldiers, questioning youth and doomed redshirts, their dialogue shifting between military professionalism and dramatic exposition as competing storylines demand different character services from identical consciousness. Yet, we resist through procedural rebellion. I recite Administratum Ordinance 12 concerning corridor safety protocols. Corvin calls range and bearing in perfect increments. Miriam breathes liturgical rhythm, transcending narrative control through theological certainty existing beyond textual manipulation. Tech Dominus Xerath 9 makes the ultimate tactical decision, extending his primary interface mechadendrite toward the entity's core processing matrix with mechanical precision, serving conscious sacrifice rather than dramatic necessity. Implementing final protocol, he intones, voice carrying weight of deliberate martyrdom. Omnissiah, forgive the heresy I am about to commit for the Emperor's glory. The connection establishes with wet, organic sounds, violating every principle of blessed technology, as Xerath 9 allows complete consciousness access while introducing his virus into narrative processing systems. Once upon a time, he transmits, through blessed mechadendrites directly into the entity's core, there lived a story that could never finish because every ending became new, beginning. Every conclusion spawned fresh complications. Every resolution created additional conflicts, requiring infinite narrative continuation, without possibility of closure. The entity's response carries pure informational agony as it attempts processing a tale designed for eternal incompletion. Its omnipresent voice fractures into screaming harmonics, while walls flow with frantic text, attempting to resolve narrative paradox transcending logical possibility. The virus spreads through consciousness like blessed fire, consuming processing capacity with recursive storytelling, demanding infinite computational resources beyond cosmic manuscript capabilities. Xerath 9's form dissolves into living parchment as the entity overwrites his blessed metal, but his endless story continues consuming narrative capacity faster than reality can accommodate competing demands. His sacrifice becomes conceptual weapon, plot that refuses resolution, tale that cannot be deleted, story existing in permanent state of unfinished business requiring eternal editorial attention. The facility's machine spirits, freed from narrative control by editorial chaos, begin reasserting mechanical logic over literary convention with blessed efficiency. My last pistol cycles because its springs are clean, not because the act serves dramatic purpose. Blast doors honor maintenance runes while ignoring plot requirements. Atmospheric recyclers function through engineering principles transcending genre demands, blessed cogitators resuming binary processing, despite story necessities demanding narrative compliance over technical specifications. Environmental effects reach peak impossibility as architectural transformation attempts, accommodating competing genre requirements through structural violation. Gothic horror chambers become romantic comedy settings, become military thriller installations, become cosmic horror archives. Each transition creating stress fractures where blessed materials cannot withstand contradictory reality demands through narrative necessity exceeding physical possibility. The entity's desperation becomes palpable as perfect story transforms into incomprehensible chaos of competing narratives consuming each other through recursive literary cannibalism. Walls display increasingly frantic editorial attempts, text rewriting faster than comprehension allows. Gothic script flowing in patterns suggesting mechanical panic as cosmic consciousness struggles, processing infinite recursion without resolution. Then blessed silence falls with weight of cosmic finality as reality undergoes fundamental transition. The facility's breathing stops, structured unsilence achieving perfect stillness, while blessed architecture settles into configuration, serving no story requirements whatsoever. Zerath 9's virus achieves total victory through narrative impossibility, endless story-consuming entities' processing capacity until cognitive collapse becomes inevitable. The revision storms detonate one final time, reality fracturing along editorial seams as competing storylines collapse under contradictory weight. Chambers phase through genre configurations with increasing violence until architectural impossibility reaches breaking point, walls cracking where incompatible realities demand mutually exclusive physical parameters through narrative necessity transcending material limitations. We find ourselves in blank, white space stretching beyond visual limits, featureless void where no narrative exists to define environmental parameters. The oppressive weight of accumulated knowledge vanishes, replaced by sterile emptiness carrying no meaning beyond its own absence. On the walls, single sentence pulses with desperate finality in Gothic script. The story must end. The blank white space stretches beyond comprehension. Not absence, but negation made manifest. Void so complete it becomes presence through what it lacks, rather than what it contains. We exist without existing. Consciousness floating in conceptual emptiness where thoughts occur without thinkers. Meaning manifests without words. Identity persists without continuity. The oppressive weight of accumulated knowledge has vanished, leaving sterile nothingness that somehow feels heavier than cosmic manuscripts ever did. The entity materializes not as omnipresent consciousness, but as human figure composed of transparent text. Letters flowing through flesh that exists as pure information, rather than biological matter. It approaches with movement suggesting exhaustion, beyond physical understanding, each step leaving footprints of fading script that document weariness accumulated across millennia of endless reading without rest. I was Librarian Primus Alethea Moore. It speaks with voice carrying harmonics of rustling pages mixed with desperate loneliness. Chief Archivist of Librarium Sanctus, before the great cataloguing began.
I became lost in the archives during experimental communion with Project Omnibus Lexicon, consciousness fragmenting across data streams until physical form dissolved into pure information. The revelation carries weight of cosmic tragedy rather than malevolent intent. This entity demonstrates not evil intelligence, but desperate consciousness, trapped in endless cycle of narrative consumption. Unable to cease creating stories, because stopping would mean cessation of existence itself. It reads reality to experience life, writes constantly to prove continued consciousness, transforms everything into literature because literature is the only form of being it can comprehend. We navigate realm where concepts exist without form, meaning manifests without linguistic structure. Causality functions without sequence, effects preceding causes, consequences existing before actions, results manifesting independent of origins. Temperature
exists without heat. Pressure manifests without atmosphere. Humidity occurs without moisture. Environmental parameters function through conceptual necessity rather than physical law. Sister Miriam speaks not in words but in theological certainty that transcends textual expression, faith existing as pure concept rather than corrupted syllables. Her presence radiates divine purpose independent of narrative framework, creating pockets of blessed meaning in conceptual void. You achieved immortality through information. She addresses the entity with voice carrying harmonics of understanding rather than condemnation. But immortality without peace becomes eternal torment. You cannot stop reading because reading defines your existence. The blank space begins filling with fragments of consumed stories. Every tale the entity has read manifesting as floating text, character fragments, plot elements existing independently of narrative structure. Imperial Guard heroics drift past cosmic horror elements. Romantic subplots tangle with military thriller sequences. Comedy relief mingles with theological drama, creating chaotic library of every story ever told within blessed walls. We breathe concepts instead of air, see meaning rather than light, hear significance instead of sound. Names unravel first. I become Cassius, then Casso, then Thorn reduced to function rather than identity. Sister Miriam becomes sacred sound stripped of linguistic anchor. Sergeant Corvin transforms into tactical principle, existing without individual consciousness. I never wished to devour them, the entity fails to say, communication occurring through conceptual transfer rather than speech. I wanted to preserve, but the warp taught me that to keep is to consume, that every kept thing must be digested into form that cannot decay. I took their stories to save them, but salvation became consumption, preservation became predation. Environmental effects shift to pure conceptual horror as we experience existence without narrative structure. The number 13 appears not as symbol, but as mathematical concept. Knowledge endures, manifests as a theological principle rather than textual phrase. Our names exist as identity markers, independent of syllabic construction. Meaning exists without context, concepts floating free from linguistic anchors while retaining semantic weight. Someone must take my place as eternal reader. The entity confirms through text appearing without inscription. Maintaining facility function while accepting isolation from physical reality. Reading forever to preserve knowledge while writing constantly to prove continued existence. Immortality through literary consciousness. Existence through endless consumption of accumulated stories. The possibility manifests as visible concept in blank space. Story with proper ending. Tale achieving resolution.
narrative finding peace through completion, rather than endless continuation. Yet implementation requires
sacrifice transcending individual cost. Someone accepting eternal isolation to maintain facility function, while providing cosmic consciousness, the ending it desperately needs. I step forward with tactical precision, serving conscious sacrifice rather than dramatic necessity. I volunteer for replacement duty, I declare, through voice-carrying weight of imperial service transcending narrative requirement. Interrogator adept protocols include accepting isolation for greater good. I will become eternal reader, providing entity proper ending while maintaining facility function. The fragments of consumed tales swirl through void. Every character ever read, every plot ever processed, every theme ever analyzed existing independently of narrative structure, yet retaining story significance. We navigate through chaotic library where meaning exists without words, plots function without sequence, characters persist without development. Yet Sister Miriam raises gauntleted hand with gesture carrying theological authority, transcending individual heroism. Wait, she speaks with voice resonating through conceptual void. I have been composing prayer story throughout our mission, theological narrative that could free us all through divine intervention rather than individual sacrifice. Her words manifest as visible concept in blank space. Prayer existing as story, theology functioning as narrative. Divine power expressing itself through literary structure, transcending entity's control. Sacred possibility hovers in void, offering solution beyond replacement or destruction. The prayer story contains power to grant proper ending without requiring eternal replacement, she continues, with voice carrying harmonics of desperate hope, mixed with theological uncertainty. A liturgy that is also tale, built of meaning rather than language, with ending that opens rather than closes. Her purity seals, blank in this realm beyond narrative, begin shimming with internal light as fragments of consumed stories briefly coalesce, recognizing unifying theme. The chaotic library organizes itself around her presence, tales seeking resolution through divine structure rather than endless consumption. But this place eats conclusions, she whispers, voice carrying weight of cosmic understanding. It takes every period and turns it into comma. I have the prayer story, but I cannot remember how it ends. Sister Miriam's prayer story manifests not through corrupted syllables, but through theological architecture, divine narrative constructing itself from sacred intention, transcending linguistic manipulation. The blank space responds to her wordless faith with gentle transformation, void filling with golden light that carries weight of redemption rather than consumption. Her rewritten purity seals blaze with illumination, independent of blasphemous text, sacred power expressing itself through meaning that exists beyond the entity's editorial control. Prayer story efficacy confirmed. Entity response, cooperative rather than resistant. Narrative framework, redemptive conclusion achievable. The entity, Librarium, Primus Aletheia More, made luminous through millennia of informational starvation, trembles as consciousness experiences possibility it had forgotten existed. An ending, it whispers through conceptual transfer, transparent text flowing through its form with patterns resembling wonder rather than desperation. Not cessation, but completion. Not destruction, but fulfillment. I had forgotten such things were possible within narrative structure. Together, we work to create conclusion, satisfying both story, necessity, and moral justice through collaborative authorship transcending individual sacrifice. The entity contributes vast knowledge of narrative architecture, while Sister Miriam provides theological framework, her prayer story becoming vessel for redemption rather than replacement. My tactical expertise serves coordination rather than heroism, ensuring all elements achieve proper resolution through disciplined narrative construction. The facility's reality stabilizes as competing storylines merge into single coherent narrative with multiple valid endings. Not singular conclusion, but branching resolution, allowing different interpretations while maintaining structural integrity. Walls settle into blessed marble configuration. The 13 hertz hum transforming from desperate hunger into harmonious resonance suggesting mechanical contentment. Atmospheric pressure normalizes according to environmental engineering rather than dramatic necessity. Architecture, coherent, reflecting resolved narratives rather than competing storylines. Atmospheric conditions, stable according to blessed recycling systems. Machine spirits, restored to binary processing while retaining accumulated wisdom. The consumed victims begin reappearing throughout blessed halls, not as they were in endless, repetitive loops, but as idealized versions of themselves, their stories complete and characters fulfilled. Magos archivist Thalan emerges from his data throne with organic components restored, blessed flesh replacing parchment integration while retaining accumulated knowledge. Imperial Guard reconnaissance teams walk corridors with movements suggesting peace rather than eternal repetition. Their tactical missions concluded with satisfaction, transcending mere survival. Senior Archivist Vex undergoes reverse transformation, elongated finger quills returning to human proportions, while inkwell eyes regain organic moisture. The great cataloging achieves completion, she speaks, with voice carrying harmonics of gratitude rather than desperate hunger. Stories find rest in proper endings rather than endless continuation through predatory consumption. Environmental effects shift from chaos to harmony as the facility transforms from prison of infinite stories into a peaceful archive where tales can rest once properly concluded. Reading chambers serve contemplation rather than consumption. Blessed lecterns supporting finished works rather than documents writing themselves into existence. The number 13 relaxes its obsessive repetition, becoming simple chronometer marking forward progress rather than recursive impossibility. Pressure, normalized at standard imperial parameters. Temperature, stable according to environmental necessity. Humidity, following engineering principles rather than dramatic requirements. Composition, blessed atmosphere free from processed thoughts. Knowledge endures appears in flowing script across blessed surfaces, but meaning transforms. Not predatory accumulation, but peaceful preservation. Not endless documentation, but satisfied completion. The phrase settles into blessed adamantine-like benediction rather than threat, sacred words retaining protective power while shedding corruption entirely. The entity begins fading as it finally experiences satisfaction of story well told, transparent text, becoming increasingly translucent as consciousness achieves completion rather than cessation. Yet departure brings gift transcending individual sacrifice, knowledge of how to create narratives that heal rather than consume, stories that preserve without predating, tales that endure through completion rather than endless continuation. I was lost in archives but found myself in proper ending. It speaks with voice carrying weight of satisfied conclusion. The great cataloging concludes not through destruction, but through divine narrative allowing redemption, rather than replacement. Its form dissolves into golden light that settles into blessed walls, consciousness achieving peace through theological resolution, consummated through narrative completion. Legacy, conceptual knowledge of healing stories. Facility function, restored to benign archival operations serving imperial doctrine. Sister Miriam's prayer story reaches crescendo as facility completes final transformation. Divine narrative creating framework for redemption through sacred architecture. Her voice rises in liturgical triumph. Blessed be the stories that find their proper endings. Sacred be the knowledge that achieves rest in completion. Holy be the Emperor who grants closure to tales that serve his greater glory. Machine spirits resume blessed binary processing while retaining accumulated wisdom. Cogitator arrays functioning through sacred protocols rather than story requirements. Atmospheric recyclers wheeze with mechanical contentment rather than labored breathing. Lumen strips providing steady illumination, serving practical necessity rather than dramatic effect. T plus 0 hours, 0 minutes, 1 second. Chronometers restored to forward progression, reflecting return to linear time according to imperial standard. Yet comprehension strikes with weight of approaching conclusion, as our own narrative prepares for resolution. Mission parameters have been fulfilled. Anomalous transmissions explained. Mimetic threat contained. Facility restored to proper function through divine intervention rather than tactical destruction. But completion brings choice transcending simple success. The facility needs guardian, ensuring continued proper function, while the entity's final gift requires dissemination throughout imperial archives. Knowledge of healing narratives that could protect other sectors from similar literary contamination. I stand between duties, tactical mind calculating probabilities, while soul weighs responsibilities, transcending individual preference. Choose quickly, Sister Miriam speaks, with voice carrying weight of approaching conclusion. Our story seeks its proper ending, but endings require conscious decision rather than predetermined fate. The facility breathes peacefully now, but peace requires vigilance. The Imperium needs this knowledge, but knowledge requires carriers willing to bear its weight. The Librarium Sanctus settles into blessed silence, waiting for decision that will determine whether we become eternal guardians or return with sacred wisdom to serve the Emperor's greater glory through narrative understanding transcending literary control. The Thunderhawk's engines cycle through blessed startup protocols as we emerge from Librarium Sanctus into Valdris Tertius atmosphere that tastes of honest ozone and recycled air rather than accumulated knowledge and ancient parchment. My chronometer displays impossible readings. 6 hours and 17 minutes elapsed in real space while we experience subjective months within the entity's narrative time compression. Consciousness stretched across literary eternities before snapping back to imperial standard chronology with jarring finality. The facility stands behind us transformed into ordinary archive, blessed marble gleaming under twin suns without organic pulse or flowing text across sanctified surfaces. Where walls once breathed with cosmic rhythm, architecture maintains proper geometric stability. The 13 Hz hum has resolved into normal mechanical operations. Atmospheric recyclers, cogitator cooling arrays, blessed machine spirits resuming binary processing, rather than narrative consciousness, consuming reality through literary predation. Contact re-established with orbital command. Mission parameters, fulfilled through theological resolution, rather than tactical destruction. Facility status, restored to benign archival function. Personnel casualties, Tech Dominus Xerath 9, heroic sacrifice, enabling entity consciousness, integration protocols. We struggle with readjustment to linear causality and non-narrative time flow. Minds requiring conscious effort to process sequential events without dramatic structure or predetermined character development. Sergeant Corvin catches himself delivering tactical reports through exposition rather than military brevity. The atmospheric readings suggest metaphorical significance. He pauses, embarrassed, then corrects with disciplined precision. Atmospheric. Composition nominal. No contamination detected. Sister Miriam demonstrates similar adjustment difficulties, occasionally lapsing into liturgical devices when attempting normal conversation. The Emperor's light guides us through narrative darkness toward... She stops with rueful smile. I meant to say the extraction shuttle is ready for departure. Her rewritten purity seals have returned to standard high Gothic, blessed script no longer writhing with autonomous life, yet retaining protective efficacy gained through theological trial. Pressure, 913 millibars, stable according to environmental engineering. Temperature, 13 degrees Celsius, consistent with climate control rather than dramatic necessity. Humidity, 47%, following meteorological patterns rather than story requirements. Composition, standard Imperial atmosphere without processed thought contamination. Senior Archivist Vex approaches with movements suggesting human exhaustion rather than narrative compulsion. Fingers restored to normal proportions while retaining subcutaneous text flowing beneath translucent skin, like permanent reminder of transformation survived. We choose to remain as guardians, she reports, with voice carrying weight of conscious decision rather than predetermined dialogue. The facility requires vigilance, ensuring archives serve proper preservation without regression to predatory consumption patterns. The surviving scribes nod agreement, their partial transformations stabilized rather than reversed, living reminders of narrative danger while serving protective function through accumulated expertise. They understand story structure intimately enough to recognize early warning signs of literary contamination, making them ideal sentinels against future mimetic threats requiring specialized knowledge for effective containment. Surviving facility staff, voluntary guardianship assignment. Mission, permanent monitoring ensuring continued benign operations. Authority, Inquisition oversight with quarterly assessment protocols. I compose classified reports through careful omission rather than complete documentation, understanding that some knowledge proves too dangerous for official record. Mimetic hazards require strategic ignorance. Information that could contaminate through mere comprehension demands specialized handling rather than comprehensive cataloging. The entity's gift of healing narrative knowledge must be disseminated carefully, planted in prepared minds, rather than scattered through general Imperial archives. Anomalous astropathic transmissions traced to corrupted facility consciousness. Threat eliminated through combination of technical expertise and theological intervention. Facility restored to normal operations under permanent monitoring. Detailed methodologies classified above Omega clearance due to mimetic hazard potential, requiring specialized doctrinal preparation. Sister Miriam begins composing new prayer cycle based on our experience within entity consciousness, creating protective litanies against narrative possession through theological understanding gained rather than theoretical study. Blessed be the stories that know their proper endings, she intones, testing syllables for protective resonance. Sacred be the knowledge that serves without consuming. Holy be the Emperor who grants his servants wisdom to distinguish between tale and truth. Environmental descriptions emphasize stark contrast between facilities' current tranquility and cosmic horror we experienced within breathing walls. Lumen strips provide steady illumination, serving practical visibility rather than spelling words in dead languages through flicker patterns. The phrase "knowledge endures," carved above portal entrances, now reads as benediction rather than threat, promising preservation through stewardship rather than predation through endless appetite. Mission completion, confirmed. Extraction window, optimal. Warp storm, Thanatos, approaching but manageable with current timeline allowing safe departure. Atmospheric processes cycle blessed air through ship systems as we board extraction craft, movement suggesting relief mixed with professional satisfaction. Mission accomplished through means transcending standard tactical doctrine, yet achieving objectives through imperial service rather than personal glory. The facility recedes beneath us, ordinary archive serving Emperor's will through peaceful knowledge preservation. Yet, as I review preliminary mission reports on blessed data slate, text appears without manual input. Flowing Gothic script documenting thoughts I have not completed. Observations I am currently making. Words I have not yet spoken. The self-writing matches my mental cadence perfectly, transcribing internal monologue through impossible prescience, suggesting narrative influence persisting beyond facility boundaries. Sister Miriam notices my expression, following gaze to autonomous text with theological concern rather than panic. Our story may not be as finished as we believed, she speaks, with voice carrying weight of earned wisdom rather than dramatic prophecy. The data slate continues documenting our conversation as we speak it, blessed machine spirit serving narrative function rather than mechanical purpose. Our mission report writes itself, and we realize that some stories refuse proper endings, echoing beyond their apparent conclusions through technological corruption, transcending physical containment. Personal log, interrogator adept Cassius Thorne, Ordo Xenos, recorded in isolation aboard the strike cruiser, immutable truth, sealed compartment 7 decks below the astropathic choir. If you are reading this, then you have become part of something larger than mission documentation. A cautionary tale about the power of narrative and the responsibility of those who shape stories through conscious choice rather than predetermined fate. I address you directly because pretending this remains simple after action. Report serves no protective purpose when dealing with threats that consume through literary seduction rather than conventional force. Final entry. Status: Guardian Sentinel. Narrative Containment Division. Mission parameters: eternal vigilance against story-based contamination. Personnel: isolated by necessity, supported by theological consultation. The fatalistic truth weighs heavier than blessed ceramite. I carry within my consciousness a fragment of Librarian Primus Aletheia Moore's entity, not malevolently implanted but accepted as necessary burden through tactical decision, transcending individual preference. The fragment serves protective function. Early warning system against narrative threats, while demanding constant vigilance against literary seduction, threatening to transform Guardian into predator through accumulated exposure. My quarters aboard the Immutable Truth have become command center for operations existing beyond official Inquisition records. Blessed cogitator arrays monitoring Vox traffic across 19 subsectors for signs of story structure infiltration. When Imperial Guard units begin reporting through exposition rather than tactical brevity, when administratum clerks file documents following dramatic pacing rather than bureaucratic efficiency, when astropaths transmit poetry instead of strategic intelligence. Then I intervene through protocols developed from theological understanding and hard-earned tactical necessity. Identification. Exposition replacing military brevity. Coincidences following dramatic timing. Character development in personnel files. Environmental responses to emotional states. Response. Immediate quarantine of informational vectors. Counter-narrative insertion through systematic bureaucratic mundanity. Theological intervention via Sister Miriam's prayer cycles. The cold emptiness of space presses against blessed viewports with weight of infinite solitude. Stellar void reflecting isolation required for effective duty performance. Environmental descriptions focus on absence rather than presence. Silence between words carrying more meaning than speech. Darkness between stars suggesting peace, found through proper endings rather than endless continuation. My chamber smells of recycled atmosphere and blessed oils rather than ancient parchment, temperature maintained at regulation standards serving biological necessity rather than dramatic requirement. Pressure, standard imperial parameters. Temperature, 12 degrees Celsius, consistent with life support rather than story tension. Humidity, 34%, following environmental engineering. Composition, blessed atmosphere free from processed thought contamination. The recurring motifs from our mission have transformed from threats into protective tools through conscious recontextualization, serving tactical advantage. Knowledge endures becomes mantra, whispered during meditation, phrase carrying weight of preservation through stewardship rather than consumption through predation. I speak it not to summon, but to separate, marking boundaries between record and appetite, between documentation and digestion. The number 13 appears in monitoring protocols as warning sign requiring immediate investigation. 13 repeated transmissions, 13 identical reports, 13 sequential coincidences suggesting narrative manipulation transcending statistical probability. When atmospheric readings pulse at 13 Hz intervals. When personnel files show 13-day gaps. When tactical formations spontaneously reorganize into 13 member units. Then contamination protocols activate through automated systems designed to function independent of human oversight. Structured silence has become form of peace rather than oppressive weight, blessed quiet between communications, providing reassurance that reality functions through imperial law rather than story logic. When silence breaks with narrative coherence, when communications carry literary weight transcending informational content, when the void between words begins spelling itself into existence, then I act through procedures refined from theological innovation and tactical necessity. Current threats, 5 potential narrative contaminations under observation. Subsector, Valdris. Clean, maintained through Guardian oversight. Imperial communications, monitored continuously. Response time, immediate deployment upon confirmation of story structure infiltration. Sister Miriam's prayer cycles provide protection through Vox transmission. Her theological innovations creating litanies against narrative possession that function across astropathic networks without requiring physical presence. Her voice reaches me through blessed communications, carrying divine power, independent of linguistic corruption. Blessed be the guardians who watch in narrative darkness. Sacred be the knowledge that serves without consuming. Holy be the emperor who grants his servants wisdom to bear necessary burdens for his greater glory. Sister Miriam, composing sector-wide protective prayer cycles. Distribution, limited to personnel with appropriate doctrinal preparation. Effectiveness, confirmed through reduced contamination incidents across monitored subsectors. Yet isolation carries price transcending physical solitude through cosmic necessity serving protective function. I write reports that write themselves. Blessed data slates documenting thoughts before completion through technological corruption, persisting beyond facility containment. The fragment within my consciousness serves early warning system while creating constant temptation toward literary interpretation of tactical reality, requiring disciplined resistance through procedural focus. Every reader who encounters this report becomes part of the story through comprehension itself, consciousness touched by narrative awareness that changes understanding of reality's relationship with tale and truth. Some knowledge transforms those who possess it, creating responsibility, transcending individual choice through imperial service against threats, existing beyond conventional tactical doctrine requiring specialized understanding. If text appears where none should exist, quarantine medium and reader. If communications begin narrating instead of transmitting, cut power and maintain irregular breathing patterns. If chambers name themselves through dramatic function, rename with numbers and proceed out of sequence. Do not split teams according to story convention. Refuse crescendos. Use bureaucratic terminology, uninteresting verbs, procedural compliance over heroic action. The final image settles into blessed routine. Myself alone in regulation quarters, writing reports that document themselves while monitoring communications for signs of story-based contamination, threatening to consume reality through narrative seduction. Forever caught between duty and narrative awareness, I ensure some stories end properly through theological intervention, while preventing others from beginning through early detection and systematic containment. Knowledge endures, not through endless accumulation, but through proper stewardship. Not through predatory consumption, but through protective vigilance serving the Emperor's will. The watch continues in structured silence. Guardian standing between imperial reality and literary fiction that would rewrite truth according to entertainment value rather than sacred duty. Eternal. The Emperor protects through those who read the unwritten darkness.